Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and for today's video I am participating again with the Color Throwdown Challenge, and I wanted to use the Simon Says Stamp Sketch Tulip Bouquet that came out in their, not their most recent release, the one right before it. I ordered it and it got here the other day and because I had to have it. I have a thing for tulips, plus they're just fun to color. So I'm starting with Distress watercolor paper, and I'm stamping onto the smooth side of this watercolor paper with my clear embossing ink using my anti-static powder tool. And I showed this on Instagram. I'm only with this one so far, following the Jennifer McGuire method of embossing powders, like putting them into the Sistema container with the clip. I'll link to all of it, the container and the clips and the spoons and stuff. But my detail white embossing powder I use so much that I thought might as well do this. It's time. So there's 2 containers of embossing powder in that Sistema container. Anywho, stamp those tulips. This piece, it's an A2 size piece, so it was big enough to fit them twice. So I stamped them twice using the anti-static powder tool, stamping it with clear embossing ink, coating it with the detail white embossing powder, and then I'm going to melt that with my heat tool. So once I get these completely melted, it looks boring as always, of course, because it's white on white, so you can't really see anything. Even in real life, I have trouble sometimes seeing it. That's why I will hold things up a lot of times, because it's just hard to see where the embossing actually is without a little bit of reflection. And I'm working on my Waffle Flower water medium mat because I'm really liking this thing. I really do. Anyway, I wanted to try watercoloring with the Distress Oxide sprays. I knew they would work because they're like the Distress line. Any Distress ink, Distress Oxide ink, all of that is going to work because they're all water reactive. But I wanted to try it with the sprays just because I'm kind of obsessed with the sprays. And I wanted to see if I would get kind of a different look than I would if I just used the Distress Oxide inks, which I've, watercolored with, done all the things with. So I'd shaken up the 3 colors I was using, and then I just, took the nozzle out and put little drops into the little wells on my water media mat. And FYI, I knew this would happen, but I'm just going to point it out. I don't know if you can really tell, maybe if this video is on full screen, but those drops, they do separate, even just sitting as drops, because the oxide sprays are literally a mix of pigment and dye. You have to shake them, side to side to shake everything up before you spray them. Well, it's the same thing when you're like trying to do things like this, like watercolor with them. The drops, literally the pigments settle to the bottom of the mat, and then on top of it, it's the more concentrated like dye ink, which is fine. I actually kind of liked that it was doing that. Like I would just mix it up with my brush, but I like that because you can, either mix it up with your brush or just pick up the top portion that's the more dye concentrated color and use that. So it kind of gives you more options, if that makes sense. And another thing I'm absolutely loving is, you'll see it in the end, but you can kind of see it here in the video too. I literally I used peeled paint for the green, and then I did Spice Marmalade and Fossilized Amber Spray for the tulips, because that's part of the color challenge. But that peeled paint, look at all the different shades of green between just the dye ink and the spray and the pigment mixative and all that stuff, and like how it just did its own thing. And and I watered everything down beforehand. Like I watered down each area that I was painting with the brush with just clean water, and then I brought the sprays in, like dipped my brush into the spray, painted it on. That just kind of helped move things along a little smoother, but because again it's an oxide spray, it reacts with the water, so it just created the neatest look. I'm gonna have to do more of this, especially when this next set of sprays show up that I ordered whenever. I don't even remember now, but I'm waiting for them to show up. Anywho, set those aside to dry, which it doesn't take very long. For my background, I'm using another piece of Distress watercolor paper, and I'm working on the smooth side. I don't know why I chose to work on the smooth side with this, because I kind of like the textured side. But I'm just working on the smooth side, and I am blending on Blueprint Sketch Oxide ink first, and then I end up getting out my Post-it tape just to help kind of keep my fingers from leaving marks on the paper. You can just use a scrap piece of paper, anything works. But I'm just using some Post-it tape with the sticky side like stuck to my fingers so that I can keep from getting fingerprints all over this. Not doing a perfect blend because it's not going to matter, because I'm going to splatter this and all that fun stuff anyway. But I did Blueprint Sketch first, and then I brought in some chipped sapphire and blending that all around the edges just to kind of intensify it a bit. and really loving these two in Oxide inks blended together. I think the Chip Sapphire in the Distress ink, like the regular Distress ink, has a lot more of that purple tone to it. Whereas this one with the Oxide, it's more of that like navy sort of feel. I don't know. It's just such a pretty color. So blended those onto my background. And then I'm going to splatter it with some water, of course. So I just use my Distress sprayer. But again, I just take the nozzle right out of the bottle and tap it against my finger. And I do this quite a few times to get quite a bit of splatter. I let it sit for not quite a minute. Just a little bit of time to let it, kind of reactivate that ink. And then I'll press down a piece of paper towel that's going to pick up all that ink and you get that like gorgeous splatter look. But of course, I'm not going to stop there. I had all this ink on the water media mat and I was like, I don't want to wipe it up. It's so pretty. So I kind of mixed up a bunch of it just with a wet paintbrush and I'm just splattering that on the background as well. It ends up creating a very subtle splatter because it's mixed with that ink, but it gives it out just a little something. It probably would have been more noticeable if I don't, add sparkle spray to it. But of course I'm going to add sparkle spray because how can you not? So I'm going to clean this all up first, just wipes off with baby wipe. I'll keep plugging this mat because I genuinely love it. It's awesome. You can wipe it down like this, or I've literally taken it to my sink and like washed it off in my sink with soap and water because I had so much stuff on it. It's just awesome. Anyway, wiped it all down. Got out my splat box because this does create quite a bit of mess. And I'm using the Imagine Crafts Sheer Shimmer Sparkle Spray. I've shown this in other videos. It is so pretty. This you really need to shake up because you'll see all that shimmer pigment is like solidified in the bottom. So shake it up really, really well till you don't see that pigment anymore. And then I missed it a foot or two above the project. So even with the splat box, I still managed to kind of get sparkle everywhere, but it's worth it. And then you can totally let this air dry. It doesn't take very long, but I was impatient, so I quickly just sped that up with my heat tool. And I'm going to bring this close up and I'm going to turn the flash on my phone so you guys can get a better idea. And I'll show this at the end as well, just how sparkly and shimmery this is. It's just gorgeous. I'll have a link to the shimmer spray because if you don't have any of this, I highly recommend it. It's so pretty. So I got my background done. And I die cut it with the largest of Simon's WONKY rectangles wafer dies. I also die cut those tulips with the coordinating wafer dies. So I've got those die cut and I'm going to use sentiments from the Sketch Tulip Bouquet stamp set. I'm going to stamp one of the sentiments onto just a scrap of green apple cardstock. And I'm going to stamp another part of the sentiment directly onto my background. So again, anti-static powder tool. And then I'm going to stamp these sentiments with that same clear embossing ink, just kind of making sure everything's lined up the way I want it. So once I get that one stamped, I'm going to coat it with the same detail white embossing powder, also making sure that I didn't, manage to get the emboss powder anywhere else on that background, but it was all dry. The anti-static powder tool did its job. Same thing with this part of the sentiment. Get it all coated with the white embossing powder, melt it with my heat tool, and then that sentiment with the green, I just fussy cut it with scissors because there isn't a coordinating die for that word, but I didn't want it die cut with a straight edge like I usually do with my sentiment label dies. So I just trim that out with my scissors. And then to adhere these to my background, I am using thin 3D foam squares just to give it a little bit of dimension, but nothing too crazy. So I'm going to pop the first little cluster of tulips into place with the foam squares. And then the second cluster, I'm going to place foam squares on half of it and then some craft tacky glue on the other half since it's going to kind of layer over the first one. So that kind of creates my fun little like bouquet of tulips, making sure not to cover the sentiment. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the spring word. I'm going to pop a couple little foam squares on the back portion of it and then some craft tacky glue just to adhere it all down to my card front. And then once I've got everything adhered into place, I can flip this over and trim down the parts of the stems that are, hanging over the bottom of the card front here. So I'm going to flip that over, trim those off just using the edge of that card front as my guide. And then once that's done, I can finish the inside of my card. So heavyweight white cardstock, standard A2 size card. I have the tulips just on an acrylic block right now because I only need like the top portion of it. And I'm inking them up in the coordinating Oxide inks. So Spice Marmalade and Fossilized Amber. Stamping those with the Oxide inks. And then the sentiment I'm stamping with that same blueprint sketch Oxide ink. Just kind of tie it all together. And since, again, this is for the color challenge, and the inside didn't have the green because I was like, it needs the green just to complete it. So I just pulled the peeled paint oxide ink out again, and I'm going to quickly splatter that onto the inside of my card before I adhere the outside. This is where I was like, oh no, I need the green, gotta add that, can't not have it. So I'm gonna pull that out, give it a nice little shake, and then just do a bit of splattering on the inside of the card, nothing too crazy. And then adhere the card front to the card base with some craft tacky glue. And then as a final bit of embellishment, I have these Studio Caudia September crystals that are the perfect shade of blue. So I was pretty heavy-handed with these because they just like work with this background. So I sprinkled them liberally around this entire background and then just adhered them into place with the craft tacky glue using my jewel picker. And that's going to finish off the card. So as always, I'll have a link below the video to my blog post. I'll have a link to the color challenge. I'll have a supply list with links. You can check that all out below if you are interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really, really appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.